Good evening, America. Welcome to your Monday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, Amanda Head, reporting to you from Los Angeles, California. My co-host, John Solomon, is out on assignment, but he's going to be rejoining me once again this week. Now, I want to circle back to what I mentioned at the top of the hour because our first guest is an incredible resource. And thanks to his work, he has dedicated his professional life to a new report authored by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection showed more than 261,000 foreigners illegally crossed our southern border in August, a record for just 1 month. Now, this comes at a time when Border Patrol has already apprehended 151 illegal immigrants on the terror watch list in less than a year. Times are certainly different with VP and border czar Kamala Harris in charge, and I think that our first guest would probably agree with that sentiment. So joining us now is Derek Maltz, Sr. He's the former Special Operations Director of the DEA and now a great advocate for law and order at the border. Derek, great to see you again. Welcome back.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it.
You know, it seems like every day or maybe every week there is a new high bar or low bar, depending on how you look at it, set for the Biden administration. We continue hitting these records, record number of illegals in a week, record number of illegals in a day, record number of illegals in a month, record number of people on the terror watch list, record pounds of fentanyl, record after record after record, and none of them are good.
Right. I mean, so we could go on all day on the stats, but let me just give you a stat or something that happened last week when I was in Jamaica at the DEA's largest law enforcement conference ever. There were 130 countries represented to collaborate and cooperate with the U.S. DEA did a great job uniting all these countries. One partner that didn't show up was the Mexican government. How is that acceptable to anybody in America? But Amanda, let's keep in mind, according to the research study that came out last week, all over the news, the cartels are the fifth largest employer in Mexico. So why would the corrupt Mexican government officials want to shut down their fifth largest business? But they're killing our kids at record levels, and families are suffering. That's unbelievable, and every American should be upset about that.
Well, and not only is it Mexico's fifth largest business, and we've talked about this statistic before, their monthly revenue under President Trump was $500 million, or yearly revenue. Under Joe Biden, it's $13 billion, 26x what it was under President Trump. And now we are reaping the repercussions of it. And a lot of this, you know, so much of these devastating aspects and statistics that come out. I know that you are a champion of getting that out there, and you are a champion of fighting for people who have lost loved ones due to a crazy open border. So Lost Voices of Fentanyl, this was a march, a part of your annual march held on Saturday in Washington, D.C. Thousands of family members showed up. Talk to us about what happened on the ground there.
Well, it was pouring rain. It was like hurricane rain and winds, but families still came up because they said there's nothing going to stop them from spreading awareness and speaking out to save kids. Unfortunately, the White House is not doing that. They don't have a sense of urgency. During that event, Amanda, there was a 3-year-old baby in the coffin being held up by his mother, Ashley Green from Kentucky. And it was an such an impactful story, living her nightmare again. She was an addicted single mom who got off drugs when the baby was born, but then her baby died when the baby inadvertently went into her ex-husband's, tenant's room and found some fentanyl, and the baby died. And she said, it's really sad that my baby got me off drugs, and then my baby died from someone else's addiction. But it's poisonous fentanyl everywhere. That's like in New York with the daycare center last week. A 1-year-old dies because they had fentanyl stacked up on the mats in the daycare center, and the baby died. Out in West Washington State, there was a 2-year-old girl on her father's lap, and when the father woke up, the baby was dead. And then a medical examiner said they've never seen this many pills in a baby or in a child. So this is what we have, and it's all because the cartels have incredible, unbelievable access on the border, and they're flooding our country with these deadly substances.
I want to go back to the event that took place on Saturday, because that is absolutely gut-wrenching to hear about that mom. And the sad thing is that there are literally millions of other Americans who are somehow connected to stories like that. But you're in there, you're in Washington, D.C., you're in Joe Biden's backyard, the backyard of the White House. Was there any recognition from Biden's administration about this march?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, we went right outside the White House and the families were screaming and, asking for them to close the border, save our kids. I mean, it's so upsetting to watch. And by the way, Amanda, those courageous families are what's been inspiring me to continue working to support them. And we had Tom Homan out there. We had Mark Morgan. Okay, we had Jason Jones. We had Sarah Carter. We had Victor Avila, who was ambushed in Mexico with his partner, Jaime Zapata, when he worked for Homeland Security investigations. And Victor is lucky to be alive. Jaime Zapata was killed by those ruthless cartels. And now we're giving them the ability to operate with impunity as they work with the Chinese criminal networks. And our kids are dying at historic levels. It's disgusting. And remember, I always say it, but without border security, we'll have no country. And that's what every American needs to realize. I mean, just look at the videos that we're seeing on some of the conservative cable news shows, and you see the mass amounts of people coming in. But then our Homeland Security Director is telling everyone, our secretary is telling everyone that he has operational control over the border. The deception is really, really very sad. As a former law enforcement executive who spent 28 years in the DEA, it's hard to imagine how these people could be deceiving the public. The kids are being deceived to death. Now our administration is telling the public, false information.
Yeah, it may have been raining in Washington, D.C., but I'm sure there was nice beach weather in Delaware, and that's where Joe Biden was. He probably was not paying much attention because he was too busy getting his tan. I wanted to ask you about the Democrat response to this, Derek, because you do have a few Democrats who talk about the fentanyl crisis and the opioid crisis and things that are the result of an open border. But they never talk about the source of these problems. They never talk about the open border until you find a Democrat on the border, like the mayor of El Paso. There are a number of Democrats who serve in elected positions along the border who are screaming for help. And you've now got New York mayor who's finally saying something and finally calling this out to the president. Does that make an impact with respect to voting in elections?
Well, it should, but the mainstream media is not covering the facts. They're covering the politics, and they're favoring the Biden administration when they talk about the border, and they're misleading. So here's something I've said repeatedly recently. So the most important number that is being put together now is the Godaway numbers. But we only know about that because we have friends in the Border Patrol that are telling us. But the DHS is not reporting to the American public the amount of known gotaways. Those are the people coming, they're high-value targets that are being escorted into America, and they're not being apprehended. And we have no idea who they are, where they are, what they're doing here, who sent them, what's their motive. But DHS is not publishing that. And we don't even hear that on mainstream media. The Godaway numbers are up to about 1.6, 1.7 million known. There could be over 2 million, probably more than 2 million. Those are the ones that are going to be doing some bad stuff in our country. Okay, this is not about just poor people trying to get a better life in America. And by the way, the experts are telling me that 90 to 95% of the asylum claims are fraudulent. So why are we letting them in? President Trump made them stay in Mexico to file their asylum claims. And that kind of is why we saw drastic decreases in apprehensions, illegal apprehensions, because they didn't want to come into America just to be put in a lockup facility or sent back. So they stayed in Mexico. So we need that to, start up again.
Derek, we just got 30 seconds left. I wanted to ask you about that number that came out last week. Over 100,000 illegal immigrants who, when they filled out that asylum form, they didn't put legitimate addresses. Is that because they just didn't have an address to give and they were so desperate to come here, or they have malevolent intent?
They have an intent to come here to get freebies. They want babies. They want food. They want a house. Our homeless people, some of them veterans, are sleeping on the streets. They can't get free housing. So they have this intent. And by the way, there is no fear right now. The cartels do not fear us. That's why we have to decimate them.
No. So, and these people have no fear of having to show up for their court date either. I know it. Absolutely. Director Maltz, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. I love your passion and your fire for this so much. You are irreplaceable. All right.